I'm excited to be here at the second national conference on low carb medicine in Shenzhen, China. And since this is my first presentation to the Chinese people, I wanted to give a little personal story. I view Chinese Americans as disciplined, industrious, and ethical people that have contributed a lot to the American heritage and culture. I consider myself to be a globalist. This world belongs to all creatures. And that my country, the United States, is an amazingly diverse country, which is multi-ethnic, multicultural, pluralistic society. And the strength of this country is because it respects people from all different and diverse backgrounds. So with that, I wanted to give an idea about cholesterol, its manufacturing or synthesis, how it is precisely regulated, to explain the mechanisms by which body regulates cholesterol. If we have an open mind and we don't consider cholesterol to be a metabolically bad molecule, we can understand the mechanisms and see what it is contributing for our health. And I have made this very simple so that even the person who is uninitiated in science will understand. I'm also going to explain that how blood cholesterol levels are discordant with cholesterol production in the body, and that high blood cholesterol levels often accompany situations which you would not suspect, such as fasting, such as being on a low carb diet. On the contrary, blood cholesterol levels are somewhat low in people who are consuming a high carbohydrate diet, despite them being metabolically unhealthy, as I will explain. And I would like to resurrect high cholesterol and LDL, because 2/3 of cholesterol is LDL, because it has important biologic functions, especially in this pandemic, in terms of protecting us from bacterial and viral infections as well as inflammation. When an individual goes on a low carb diet and starts fasting, and they get a blood work after a while, and with what they have done, they have lost weight, their blood pressure is better, they feel great, and yet when they get their blood work, they see a lot of red. The red is pointed out here. The LDL cholesterol is high, the total cholesterol is high, the particle number is high. All of this creates a panic, despite the fact that other aspects of this blood work are good, such as triglycerides are low, HDL is high, insulin level is low, inflammation markers are normal, and the LDL cholesterol is large and fluffy. If I were presenting this data, I would put all these numbers in green rather than in red. This is my attempt at explaining to you how our body regulates cholesterol. Cholesterol is principally regulated in the liver. This is a liver cell. And in the liver cell, if you focus on it, here is the nucleus, which is the captain of the cell. It gives instructions to the cell what to do. This is the endoplasmic reticulum. This is the cholesterol and protein manufacturing machinery of the cell. The HMG-CoA reductase is an enzyme critical for making cholesterol. So that is more or less the assembly line or the machinery that makes cholesterol. Our body has a cholesterol sensor in the liver cell. This is called SREBP2. This sensor is gauging how much cholesterol is there and whether the cell should jack up the machinery to make cholesterol or turn it down. In addition, the liver cell has something called LDL receptors, LDLR. These are receptors that are designed to pick up cholesterol from the bloodstream. Now, our bloodstream is watery. It is aqueous. It cannot carry cholesterol because cholesterol is a fatty substance. So in order to dissolve cholesterol in bloodstream, our body carries them in boats. And one of this boat out here is shown as the LDL particle. It has an outer coat that makes it dissolvable in blood, an identifying protein, and the cargo of this is cholesterol and triglycerides, in addition to other components that we shall see. And it is this LDL cholesterol that is picked up by the LDL receptor in the liver cell in certain situations. Now let us explore different situations. So this is a situation in which the individual is fasting. When you're fasting, the liver does not need to make any cholesterol. The reason is that in a fasted state, you're not growing, your insulin levels are low, cell growth is not happening. Consequently, the liver does not need to make cholesterol. The liver senses that. And since it senses that it doesn't need to make cholesterol, the cholesterol manufacturing machinery is turned down. The machinery that senses whether cholesterol should be made or no, which is out here, SREBP2, is also inactive. I will show you an active form of that a little bit later. Now, since the liver does not need any cholesterol, it either reduces the number of LDL receptors or puts the LDL receptors in hiding. And consequently, the liver is not picking up cholesterol from the bloodstream. What happens next? What happens next is that the liver is neither picking up the cholesterol nor making any, but it has some cholesterol and it starts exporting this cholesterol into the bloodstream as an LDL particle. I know this. I have looked at it in several of my patients, and there are very good investigations that prove that this to be the case. A fasted liver cell is not synthesizing cholesterol. It's not picking up cholesterol, but it is making LDL, which is a cholesterol-filled lipoprotein, a cholesterol-filled boat. And I think one of the reasons it's doing this, for people who are geeks, I have been accused of being a geek and a nerd, and I'm giving out a little bit of information for the fellow nerds, that perhaps the reason a fasted liver cell puts out an LDL is because in fasting there is autophagy. Autophagy is a situation in which senescent protein and cells are being removed, and consequently there is a lot of cholesterol flux. And this cholesterol needs to be transported back to the liver, and the LDL is a mechanism to do that. Now, this is an elegant study in normal people in which cholesterol was radio-labeled. Actually, the lipoprotein was radio-labeled in order to see whether a fasted liver is making LDL, which is the cholesterol-filled lipoprotein, or VLDL. And I'll take you to this slide and show you that in the fasted individual, the liver is making a lot more LDL and less VLDL. When these individuals are fed, the VLDL level increases or the production rate increases, the LDL production rate goes down. So to simplify this and make this redundant, with fasting, the body does not need new cholesterol. No new cells are being made. There is no growth, like no new muscle cells. And hence, the liver does not need to make any cholesterol. So it's not going to pick up the cholesterol from the LDL receptors. It's going to downregulate the LDL receptors. The sensor that tells the liver to make or not make cholesterol, which is SREBP, remains in the inactive form. I promise you that I'll show you the active form of that. The machinery that makes cholesterol, the HMG-CoA reductase, goes down, and the liver now exports LDL instead of VLDL, which is a cholesterol-filled lipoprotein. So thus with fasting, and again I'm making it redundant here, liver is not making cholesterol, it's not making the LDL receptor, the cholesterol sensor is inactive, it's exporting cholesterol as VLDL. What does the blood work look like? The blood work shows low insulin levels, low triglyceride levels, high HDL levels, and high LDL levels. Just think for a minute. If LDL was bad for us, then fasting would be very dangerous. Yet we know from several cultures, rich cultures, that fasting is one of the most health-promoting activities that we can have. And everybody agrees that low insulin, low triglycerides, and high HDL is a good thing. So, since fasting is good, is the paradigm that high LDL is bad for us wrong and we should re-examine that? Moving on to a situation in which a person is consuming a low carb, high fat diet or an animal sourced food diet, and I am putting slides side by side to indicate that both are nearly the same. So in this situation, the person is eating a lot of cholesterol in their food. And when they're eating a lot of cholesterol, the liver gets a lot of cholesterol into it from the outside. Since the amount of cholesterol is very high, the cholesterol sensor senses that there is enough cholesterol, I don't need to make cholesterol. And hence it turns down the cholesterol making machinery. Now it's picking up some cholesterol from the circulation, but since cholesterol is there in plentiful form, the receptor to pick up cholesterol is reduced. It's not numerous in number. Now, an individual on an animal sourced food diet is very similar. A lot of cholesterol is present in the liver cell. The cholesterol sensor senses this, turns down the machinery to make cholesterol. The LDL receptor is not promoted to a big degree. In other words, there are not that many of them. You do pick up some LDL. However, the amount of LDL is high in the bloodstream. And since the liver has all this cholesterol, it's going to now not put out a fat-filled lipoprotein molecule. It's going to put out an LDL molecule. I will explain to you why it is not going to put out a fat-filled molecule in a little bit when we talk about fat synthesis. So with a low-carb, high-fat diet, the liver does not need to make cholesterol since we are eating plenty. There is growth. Protein initiates an insulin response. Many people think that protein does not initiate insulin, but it does. The LDL receptor is present but not numerous. the cholesterol sensing machinery is inactive. The cholesterol making machinery is turned down, and the liver is exporting cholesterol as LDL rather than the fat-filled VLDL. Now, this is to explain to you that when you look at the three macronutrients, or the two macronutrients in this case, carbohydrates and protein, protein initiates an insulin response. However, that insulin response is slightly lower in magnitude, and the peak is a little delayed compared to glucose as shown here in the green line. One of the best ways to induce a bang-up insulin response is to feed both protein and glucose together, as you can see here in this red line. To summarize, when you're on a low carb diet, what does the blood work look like? The liver is not making cholesterol because it's getting enough from the outside. The LDL receptor is only slightly increased, not by much, because the liver already has a lot of cholesterol. The cholesterol sensor is inactive because there is plenty of cholesterol, and the liver is exporting a lot of LDL, which is the cholesterol-filled lipoprotein molecule. Consequently, what we see out here is that insulin is down, triglycerides are down, HDL is increased, perhaps more so than in the situation of fasting, and LDL goes up a lot. This situation is very similar to that of fasting. In fact, people on a low carbohydrate diet frequently fast because of satiety and lack of hunger. And if they don't, this should be promoted. Moving on to a vegan who takes no animal products and consequently they have no cholesterol in their diet. What is happening at the level of the liver? A liver cell is now depleted of external cholesterol. There is no cholesterol that it's getting from the outside. And hence, the liver says, hey, I don't have enough cholesterol. I need to make cholesterol. And now in this situation, what happens is that the cholesterol sensor gets activated. It moves from the ER or in the cytoplasm into the nucleus, and it tells, hey, let's jack up the machinery to make cholesterol, and the liver starts making cholesterol. Not only does it do that, but it jacks up the LDL receptors. It increases the LDL receptors so that it can absorb, it can take in the cholesterol from the LDL that's present in our bloodstream. Can this be shown in experimental fashion? Yes, it can be. So this is the cholesterol sensor, and in the panel to my left is cholesterol present in serum. These are cells that are grown in cholesterol-rich medium. And what we find out here is that the cholesterol sensor is not in the nucleus that gives signals to the cells to start making cholesterol manufacturing machinery. The signal is predominantly in the cytoplasm, as you can see from staining of the sensor, the SREBP2. It's messed up out here, I did not realize that. The sensor is predominantly in the cytoplasm when stained with an antibody. On the other hand, you take these same cells and you deplete cholesterol from their medium, the sensor becomes active. It goes to the nucleus and it tells, hey, I am depleted of cholesterol. I need cholesterol. Start making the machinery to produce more cholesterol. So to make it redundant, the vegan on a low cholesterol diet jacks up the machinery to make cholesterol, increases the LDL receptor so that it can absorb the cholesterol from the bloodstream. The SREBP2, the signal that is sensing cholesterol, moves to the nucleus, as you can see out here, and it's telling the cell, hey, make cholesterol. In summary, cholesterol is so precisely regulated and it is so important for our biology that if you don't eat cholesterol, the body will make its own cholesterol. Now let's explore how fat production or synthesis ties into the cholesterol production and synthesis and how it is regulated in the liver. Now fat has a similar sensor. Instead of calling SREBP2, it's called 1C. And in a situation in which a person is fasting, again, when you're fasting, the liver says, hey, I'm not making any fat. So the fat making machinery, the fatty acid synthase is down. No fatty acids or triglycerides are being made. The insulin receptor is inactive because there is very little insulin, and there is no glucose or sugar getting into the liver cell. What about a situation in which somebody is eating a high carb diet? In the presence of a high carb diet, there is plenty of insulin, there is plenty of glucose. Now, the insulin receptor is activated, insulin signaling starts, and the GLUT4 pore is activated, so the sugar gets into the cell, and through the mitochondria, it is given to the fat making machinery as citrate, and this fat making machinery, the fatty acid synthase, converts that into fatty acids and subsequently triglycerides. The reason this is happening is because insulin is giving a signal to the cell to start releasing the SREBP1C into the nucleus to tell the cell, hey, this American has eaten a large amount of carbs. I need to take these carbs that he has eaten and convert it into fat, because the body cannot store carbs in large quantities. We have to convert that to fat. Now for the nerds, this is the biochemical pathway. We don't need to go into it any detail because this is a talk for everyone. But in a sense, the sugar that is eaten through the mitochondria is given as citrate to the fat making machinery to convert citrate to palmitate, which is a fatty acid. What does the liver do with all the triglycerides that it's making? It packs the triglycerides into a lipoprotein molecule that is fat-filled. So it is triglyceride rich, cholesterol poor, and now it's called very low density lipoprotein, or VLDL. Now let's explore how the sensor works. So these are elegant studies done in mice in which the fat sensor, the SREBP1C, is explored in these mice. The mice were fasted for 24 hours. The sensor was checked to see whether it is active in the nucleus, telling the cell to make fatty acid making machinery, or whether it was inactive in the fasted state. In the fed state, the same thing was checked. Is it active or inactive? Let us see what we found. So this is a gel, and the gel is measuring the amount of SREBP1C. This is the fasted state. The mice has fasted for 24 hours. The nucleus has no active SREBP1C. That means that the cell is receiving signals, I'm fasting. The liver is receiving signals, I'm fasting. I don't need to make any fat making machinery. I'm going to remain in the cytoplasm. On the other hand, when these mice are refed compared to the basal situation, see how much there is an increased expression of this SREBP in the nucleus, giving the cell instructions that, hey, make fat manufacturing machinery to convert carbs into fat. And the increase is 5 to 20-fold over baseline. Does this happen only in rats or does it happen in humans? So this is a human study in which people who were lean and normal insulin and some obese people who are metabolically healthy. In other words, usually in the United States, we find people who are heavier, but they have normal insulin levels. So these are metabolically healthy obese people. These people are obese and have high insulin levels. So these are not metabolically healthy. This group was fed a low carb, high fat diet. And when low carb, high fat was given, the lean normoinsulinemic and the obese normoinsulinemic people did not make any more fat. Here is the measurement of new fat in the liver, and the increase was minimal. I put a red star out here to remind you that as low carb practitioners, we have to individualize our diet for everyone who comes to us. So if you have an obese person who has high triglycerides, who has insulin resistance, perhaps going on a low carb, high fat diet is not the right answer. There are better strategies that I have discussed elsewhere in my talks on lipotoxicity. Let us move on and explore the situation in which people who are lean and normoinsulinemic or obese and hyperinsulinemic were given a high carb diet. When you're given a high carb diet, even if you're normoinsulinemic, you jack up the production of new fat in the liver quite dramatically compared to the situation in which you have given a low carb, high fat diet and you are lean and normoinsulinemic. I want to put together the control of both cholesterol and fat sensors. The SREBP2 is a cholesterol sensor. The 1 is a fat sensor. With fasting, the fat sensor remains inactive. When you refeed, it increases 5 to 20-fold. On the other hand, the cholesterol sensor, although it gets inactive with fasting, cholesterol is so precisely regulated that when you refeed, the body does not overproduce cholesterol like it overproduces fat. The cholesterol levels either go back to baseline or can go at the most up to 2x, twofold. What I would like to mention by this is that fat synthesis can be increased up to 20-fold, whereas cholesterol synthesis is more precisely regulated by the body. I also wanted to show you the discrepancy between cholesterol synthesis and blood levels of cholesterol. So here are mice that are fasted. With fasting, we said that cholesterol synthesis goes down. The liver is not picking up any cholesterol from the bloodstream. So despite a lower synthesis, the blood levels of cholesterol compared to the usual state are higher. In mice, they went from 100 to 115. When these mice are refed, the LDL receptor gets jacked up. The liver is sucking up cholesterol, and consequently, the cholesterol levels actually go down despite the fact that there could be an increase in cholesterol synthesis. This is one of the reasons why Dave Feldman talks about if you want to beat an insurance test in which you're trying to get insurance and you want to show them that you have low cholesterol, eating a diet that is high in carbs the day before your blood test will jack up your insulin levels, will increase your LDL receptor, and the liver will suck up your LDL and your LDL levels will be lower the following day. Is there human data with this regard? So this is a beautiful experiment that was done in normal people who went through an 8-day fast. So they are fasting for 8 days, taking only water and salt. What happened to their LDL levels? Their LDL was 112 in the beginning of the study. At the end of 8 days, it went up a whopping nearly 70%. The cholesterol tracks the same as the LDL does. Now, since they are not eating, insulin levels fall. A marker of insulin is insulin-derived growth factor, or IGF. IGF levels go down, and when IGF levels go down, the body starts doing autophagy, which is cleanup, which is a good thing. So when you examine a high-carb, low-fat diet and you summarize it, what we find is that the body takes the extra carbohydrates that you have eaten and converts it into fat because you cannot store carbs in large quantities. That insulin stimulates the fat manufacturing machinery. It makes the SREBP1, and I messed up out here, move from the cytoplasm into the nucleus. Insulin also gives signals to increase the number of LDL receptors. It jacks up the cholesterol manufacturing machinery twofold. It jacks up the fatty acid synthesis machinery by 5 to 20-fold. And hence the liver is now making triglyceride-rich, fat-rich lipoproteins that are exported into the bloodstream. What does the body do with it? You're eating a high-carb, low-fat diet. The liver is putting out a lot of triglyceride-rich lipoproteins as VLDL. The body takes it and it says, hey, let me find a fat cell so that I can unload my fat cargo. But like Indians, Chinese people also have a low personal fat threshold, and in most of these situations, years of this kind of behavior leads to the fat cells being overstuffed and full, and they say, no more, we cannot take any fat. So the VLDL cannot deposit fat into the fat cells. It attempts to give it to the muscles and the heart to be burned, fat oxidation, beta oxidation. But remember, you just ate a lot of carbs. The body is always going to burn the carbs first and the fat second. So the muscles don't want it, the liver does not want it. So what happens to all this extra fat that is circulating in the bloodstream? This extra fat then comes out as fatty acids that gets deposited in our pancreas, in our liver, in our heart. And this is the bad thing called visceral obesity that makes us sick and diabetic and get heart disease. This is another important aspect about fat toxicity that I want to point out, which is happening not as a result of you eating fat. It's happening as a result of you eating too much carbs and not being able to burn fat. And what happens is that there is a high production of VLDL by the liver. The fat cells don't want it. The muscle cannot burn it. The fat from here, the fatty acids, then combine with a breakdown product of protein called serine. And in the presence of some enzymes, it creates a very toxic fat called ceramide. When ceramide gets into the pancreas, it destroys the pancreatic cells. So your insulin making machinery is destroyed. When it gets into your heart, into your muscles, into your liver, it messes up the insulin receptor and increases insulin resistance. To make it redundant, a person on a high carbohydrate standard American diet, what does the blood work look like? Remember, the liver, the sensors to make fat and cholesterol are activated. Fat synthesis is up by 2 to 20-fold, cholesterol synthesis is up by 2-fold. The liver is exporting fat in VLDL molecules. When you look at the blood work shows high insulin, low HDL, high triglycerides, while the LDL levels may not be too high. They may be either the same or maybe even a little bit low. How does the medical profession, the mainstream medical profession, look at this blood work? Now, they have been completely uninitiated in the regulation of cholesterol in the human body. If this was taught to me in medical school or when I was a cardiology fellow, I must have slept through the classes or missed them. I don't think it's ever taught. Consequently, they are unaware of what's happening in the body. Insulin, they don't measure it because they don't really understand it. They do know that HDL is down and it's not a good thing, but they don't pay enough attention to it because there are no drugs that can increase your HDL. They do pay a little bit of attention to triglycerides because you can be given drugs that can lower triglycerides, but they are severely ineffective. They really make no impact. In fact, the medical professional may give this person a false sense of security that everything is good because your LDL is not too high. A lipid profile like this should give pause that something is seriously wrong with our metabolic health. Unfortunately, it hardly produces a reaction from the mainstream medical professionals. And this icon here is from my Mac. I transferred my Mac to the PC to do this recording. And it was supposed to be an angry man, and it just doesn't show up as that. So let's explore what cholesterol does, LDL cholesterol does in the body, and we're going to focus on the properties of LDL cholesterol as host defense and modulation of inflammation. When you have a bacterial or viral infection, bacterial and viral products get into the bloodstream. These are called lipopolysaccharide or lipoviral particle. This gets sucked up either by the HDL or the LDL. So LDL is picking this up, HDL is picking this up. The LDL then gives it to the liver, and the liver then eliminates this in bile into the intestine so that they can be safely eliminated. The HDL can give it either to the liver or to the macrophage for it to be processed so that it is made harmless. In certain situations, if the LDL is damaged quite significantly, it becomes what is called oxidized LDL. It doesn't go to the liver, instead it is picked up by a LOX receptor. And I've given a talk about oxidized LDL as being a firefighter rather than an arsonist and how it is useful for us. And I would want you very much to consider watching it. The LDL is also an antioxidant. It carries many antioxidants such as vitamin E, CoQ10 or ubiquinol, beta-carotene, and the vitamin E or tocopherol, the CoQ10 or the beta-carotene are antioxidants that the LDL first uses to dampen inflammation. When these antioxidants are used, the LDL then starts sacrificing its phospholipid bilayer and the apoprotein. So LDL is designed as an inflammation modulating and infection fighting molecule. And when viewed from this standpoint, the LDL is a friend to be cultivated and not to be removed by drugs. One cannot talk about the ability of lipoproteins to modulate inflammation and fight infection without talking about PCSK9. PCSK9 is a protein that the liver makes. The liver makes this protein so that it can modulate the amount of LDL in the bloodstream. Why does it want to do that? So in this diagram, what is being shown is that the liver is making PCSK9 in the setting of an acute infection. The PCSK9, as it is made, it comes in and removes the LDL receptor. When it removes the LDL receptor, very little receptor is there so that the amount of LDL in the bloodstream goes up. So you can see here, there's a large amount of PCSK9, LDL receptor is removed. The liver does not pick up LDL, and consequently a lot of LDL remains in the circulation, trying to promote many of the good things that LDL does. But today we're going to talk about host defense and modulation of infection. Now, there are drugs that we make, which is called PCSK9 inhibitors, and what they do is that they soak up all the PCSK9. And when PCSK9 is soaked up, the LDL receptors are not downgraded. The LDL gets sucked up by the circulation into the liver, and consequently, very little LDL is left in the circulation. And since there is low LDL, I have removed all the benefits of having high LDL from this column. This is an animal study. There are human studies also, but I will not have time to show you that when an animal is injected with a bacterial product, which is lipopolysaccharide, the amount of PCSK9 goes up, and when the amount of PCSK9 goes up, the LDL receptor that is designed to suck up the LDL from the liver goes down, and consequently it leaves more LDL in the circulation, which is a good thing in the setting of this infection. So PCSK9 has many functions, and inhibiting that is wrong because this is an acute phase reactant that is released in response to an infection so that it can defend us from infections and modulate inflammation, in addition to many other properties that you can look at in some of my other presentations. Now, I would not be able to give you the statin data. I have done a presentation on statins, but here is a compilation of information that should give you pause and think that high cholesterol is not bad for us. This is the Hunt-2 trial, a Norwegian study in over 50,000 people with ranges in age from 20 to 74. These people were followed for 10 years. And here is looking at all-cause mortality based on their cholesterol levels. So one is line of identity. These are people at the lowest cholesterol level. And as cholesterol level is increasing, they're trying to compare and see whether there is a higher chance of death or a lower chance of death. If the chance of death is higher, the line would be up here. But as cholesterol level is increasing, especially in women, and reaching up to levels that would give a medical professional seizures, saying that, hey, you cannot walk out of my office before taking a cholesterol reducing medicine. The people with the highest cholesterol, especially women, had the lowest all-cause mortality. One more study before I finish. This is the Leiden 85 plus study in a little over 700 patients that were followed for 10 years. So these are people who are 85. They'll be followed up to age 95. These people were divided into three groups. A group with low cholesterol, that is less than 200, middle cholesterol that is 200 to 250, and high cholesterol that was greater than 250. What happened? When you looked at all-cause mortality, the risk of dying, it was the highest in the people with the lowest cholesterol. It was lowest in the people with the highest cholesterol. What about cancer mortality? It was the same. Highest in the people with low cholesterol, lowest in the people with the highest cholesterol. What about what is relevant for this presentation? Infection. Elderly people are more at risk of dying of infections. One of the most common ones is pneumonia. What happened to that? The chances of dying from pneumonia was much lower in the highest cholesterol group. That was cancer mortality, and this one is infections. Infections were lower. So how do I conclude? The paradigm that LDL is bad has led us to consume a high-carb modern diet. What does the blood work look like in this diet? It shows high insulin, low HDL, high triglycerides, and an LDL level that's about the same, sort of normal or a little low. This is dangerous because it indicates metabolic mayhem. It indicates insulin resistance. In all likelihood, it indicates that your fat cells are overstuffed and inflamed, and it gives you a false sense of security that your LDL is low and you're fine. On the other hand, our focus should be on lipoprotein and cholesterol quality. What does the blood work look like in a person who is doing the two techniques that I promote, which is a low carb diet as well as intermittent fasting combined with exercise? In this situation, the insulin is low, the triglycerides is low, the HDL is high, and the LDL is high, which I would like to submit to you is a good thing, not a bad thing, because this indicates that our fat cells are healthy, that we have normal and robust insulin signaling, and that we have protection from infections and inflammation. So for people of Shenzhen, China, this was an absolute honor for me to be able to present this to you, and I hope that this was useful. Thank you.